wanted to come back around to one of the places you started, which was just the inquiry into the types of language that we use. And I'd love to hear you unpack that a little bit more in terms of, yeah, just your thinking on that.
Yeah. One of the things I invite teachers to do is never actually use the word modification. A
Mm.
modification implies there's one way to do a pose, and everything else is an aberration of that,
Uh-huh.
versus different variations of a pose, different
Yep.
varieties. So that,
Yep.
again, as a student, I know for me, I don't want to do a modification. I want to
Yep.
do it right.
Yeah.
And those are subtle things that the teacher might think, well, I'm inviting them to do a modification. This doesn't work for their
Mm.
body. But why is one way to do it the standard, right? So there's certain
Mm.
alignment standards for sure, yet there's different ways to safely be in Warrior Two, for example,
Mm.
or a hip opener. But to imply that there's one right way, again, creates a hierarchy that for a student that might be internally competitive,
Yes.
they're not going to choose the lesser version.
Yes.
So that's one word, I invite teachers to let go of, that there's no modifications.
Mm.
Again, full wheel, full back bend is not good for most people. So to say that that's the pose and everything else is an aberration of
Yes.
that
Yes.
is inaccurate.
Yep.
So that's the big one that I talk about. I never talk
Mm.
about levels. We try to
Mm.
deconstruct
Mhm.
level one, level two. As my practice has gotten more mature, it's much simpler.
Yeah.
And I'm doing poses that look more like a level one
Uh-huh.
because they're more physically sound for my
Yep.
body.
Yep.
So, I say things like if I'm teaching a flow class, people can take a vinyasa or not, and I'll say you can take the direct route or the
Mm.
scenic route.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's no value set on which choice one makes.
Yeah.
You can take the practical route or the poetic route.
Uh-huh.
So how do we start looking at language that
Yeah.
puts everything on a level playing field so that people
Yeah.
can actually attune to what the best choice is for them?
Mm.
So those are two big ones.
I love
You
what
know,
you're saying, and I just wanted to say too, like, if we took a photograph of you in
mhm,
that supposedly level one pose,
mhm.
that photograph couldn't capture the journey of you doing all the different variations of that pose and
Mhm.
getting to the point in your own self-knowledge through all the different experiences you've had, maybe having two kids, maybe certain injuries, maybe certain
Yeah,
genetic tendencies and vulnerabilities that didn't show up until later in life, to
yeah,
get to the point where for you, it is such good medicine to be in that pose,
yeah,
inhabiting it with all of the self-awareness that you have, breathing in the way that you're breathing, self-regulating through your nervous system in the way that you've learned how to do in this wonderfully integrated way. Does that appear in the photograph that we can then send out to all of.
exactly. Versus, 20 years ago after I'd binged on sugar, fought with my codependent boyfriend, and then put both feet behind my head and smiled.
And we're like, oh, we want to be like her. And
Exactly.
if we're not being like her, if we're modifying the pose in some way, it's second best. We
Hmm.
want to get there eventually. We feel inadequate, right?
Yeah. And so many brand new yoga students feel that. I've spoken to so many people who are brand new to yoga and they feel ashamed. They feel so
Mm.
much shame if they can't do the pose the way the teacher. Oh, the other thing is, I tell teachers to demonstrate the most accessible version of a pose. So to make
Ah.
sure you're demonstrating that, because the students will do what we demonstrate.
Yeah.
So if we're demonstrating something that's a little less accessible, they're going to attempt to do that.
Mhm.
And new students feel a lot of shame. They feel like it wasn't for me. I shouldn't do that. I couldn't do what the teacher did.
Mhm.
I had to modify everything.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
such a tricky area, right? And I think it goes again back to marketing and image and charisma
Hmm.
and a kind of capacity to command people's attention, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like studios realize that not to demonize anybody because we're all in business together, right? And so we're trying to balance
Yeah.
commerce and substance and being of service to people and doing something authentic. And I feel like there's a way that teachers really have been sort of implicitly encouraged to adopt that kind of posturing, for want of a less, for want of a better word, in front of
Sure.
rooms where it's like, yes, look at me. This is how I have authority. This is how I have
And this
power.
is why I'm qualified to teach
This is
this.
why I'm qualified. This is why I'm a better teacher than who is competing with me. Even though we don't like to admit it, there is a competitiveness amongst teachers because we're competing for resources, right? So
Yeah.
how to look at that and say, okay, are you really serving your students? Are you serving the people in the room who are not able to do the thing that looks very impressive and who now either feel insecure and ashamed or feel that they need to strive to get there to be more like you?
Yeah.
How do you hold your authority and your qualification in a more secure way so that being up in front of the room, doing that Warrior One with a lot of good alignment and grounding so that it is going to be safe for everyone in the room to emulate, right? And accessible, doesn't necessarily undermine this other posturing that you've maybe been encouraged to do.
Yeah. And I think it is important, like you're saying, to acknowledge the pressure teachers are under and that some students actually aren't interested in authenticity, that they're going to resonate with the very charismatic, egoful teacher who's making promises. And that's a stage where again, I was that student. I was not interested and I couldn't recognize the subtlety of an authentic teacher. I wanted boot camp. I wanted to be kind of shamed into obedience.
Yeah.
And that plugged into my neuroses, So, for sure there's teachers, I think, that get very good feedback for being sort of this inaccessible level of discipline and perfection. It's very, very popular. And that's tough because, I think that truth doesn't always sell. It's not squeezed to market.
That's a big topic in and of itself, right? And that's the shadow. So much of our subculture is that very often people want the inaccessible, unattainable thing to aspire to and to kind of almost fetishize that. And very often too, especially, and I was like this in my first maybe 10 years of practicing, I wanted the tough teacher who was going to beat me into submission, who was going to help me get rid of my impurities and overcome my bad habits and be a more disciplined kind of pure vessel of some kind of, transcendent, hyper-focused non-attachment.
Yes, and then for me, I really wanted their approval, right? Like, it was very hard to get their approval, and then if you did it right enough, you could get their approval, and that fed that part of me that felt like I didn't deserve anything good unless I were perfect. Yeah, I know. I think we had very similar paths that way, and it's curious. I think about what the doorway in could be. Is there a healthier doorway in, or is it just part of our evolution, and that what I'm excited about that I'm seeing happen in the yoga world and some of our inner circles is what we're talking about, speaking to what is really authentic. A lot of these teachers are now being ousted. A lot of them are abusing their students, and there's more of a conversation. I know this is a whole other conversation here around those power dynamics. So I think students need to be educated and empowered around these issues.
I love what you're saying. I know we need to wrap up pretty soon here. I wanted to share one little thing that I do. I loved some of the examples you shared from your own teaching. I've been doing this kind of more recently. I have moments in the midst of yoga sequences where I invite people just to move. So come out of the pose now and feel what that pose has made available to you. Notice the body awareness that it's given you, the sort of embodied sense of yourself that may not have been there 10 minutes ago or half an hour ago. Notice the range of motion maybe that you freed up, or the sense of being centered in a kind of stable and grounded way and how that feels. Notice what you like about your capacity to be in your body now. And then while we're doing that, I'll say to them, it would be easy for you to think that we're in this room trying to perfect these poses as if we're all preparing for a photo shoot. But that is not what we're doing. Photo shoots are great, and if you have one coming up,
and they hurt.
Right, yeah, they can really hurt too. But that's not what we're doing. Rather, I want to reframe it for my students, that what we're doing is working with these different postures and sequences in such a way, not that the poses look perfect, whatever that preconceived notion might be, because it's maybe different for everyone, but in such a way that they enhance our sense of integration and embodiment and resilience and capacity to be responsive. I would much rather you come to me and say, I've enjoyed your class so much, and I've noticed that it helps me now when I go cycling. I have less pain when I have to lift my child. I'm able to do things in my life functionally I'm able to dance and move and play and connect with life through my body in ways that were not possible before I engaged in this practice. That's much more important to me.
Yeah, versus I got into this pose and nothing else has changed.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we want everything else around to change. That's beautiful. I love that experience, and I feel like what you're doing, Julian, too, is having people think beyond the pose.
Yep.
What happens after? What's available? That's I'm going to steal that.
Please feel free to take it. And then the other piece too, as well, is okay. So how does the experience I'm having on the mat translate into my capacity to be present with myself, compassionately, non-reactive, perhaps having greater insight about my patterns, able to have more nourishing relationships, able to show up and love and deal with the inevitable tension and struggle and vulnerability of being human in ways that are perhaps a little more skillful, not perfect, but perhaps a little more self-aware.
Yeah. So beautiful. So beautiful. I love teaching with you.
I love teaching with you too. It's great to have. We haven't had a conversation like this in a while.
I know. These are like our lunchtime conversations.
Yeah, it allows me to connect back into your brilliance and the depth and the nuance. Yeah, it's really nice. It's really nice. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the Hala that I first fell in love with in this wonderful intellectual way. Super cool. Any words of closing as we finish this up?
I think that it all comes back to our own personal practice, us being in therapy, us being in relationships where we're really seen. I know we encourage that in our students all the time, that so much of this learning is doing our own inner work versus mastering a technique that we're teaching. And as we're more integrated as teachers, the philosophy that we're teaching, this idea of integration, authenticity, will be a natural expression so that we can teach words, we can talk with those techniques. It has to go with our personal work. And so I always say it's a win-win because we're getting to heal ourselves. And that's our responsibility to be on that journey if we're going to hold space for others.
I love it. That's an awesome note to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much, Hala.
Julian.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.